Exploding the Castle. Rethinking how video games and game mechanics can shape the future of education. Published by Information Age Publishing. Edited by Dr. Michael F. Young and Dr. Stephen T. Slota of the University of Connecticut. Read by Dr. Stephen T. Slota. Chapter 1. Castle Upon a Hill. Written by Michael F. Young and Stephen T. Slota, University of Connecticut. Hearing the words game and school together, you might think of activities like tag or kickball being played on the playground during a recess. Or maybe you'd think of thumbs rapidly clicking on a control pad as children move avatars through imaginary Mario or Madden sports worlds, rewarding themselves for finishing comparatively dull schoolwork, homework, or testing. Some might balk in disapproval of the violent behavior, bullying, racist overtones, sexist exploitation of women, and addiction often associated with video game play, while others, including teachers, business owners, and politicians, may be envious of the sustained engagement games can induce in audiences who often have little time for or interest in a given subject. For more than a decade, learning scientists have taken the latter perspective, framing games as a pathway to content engagement rather than a simple recreational pastime. They have presented video games as a strategic and potentially transformative tool in the struggle to adapt to myriad political, economic, and social constraints that influence and create objectives for schooling, corporate training, and other kinds of formal or informal training. But is belief in the potential of games as learning tools well-founded, or is it misplaced? Or is the issue of game-based instruction simply too complex and nuanced to discuss in terms of an up or down judgment? Over the coming chapters, we, experts in education and game design, will contend that games can and should be viewed as a positive influence on the future of public and private, formal and informal education, particularly with purely online learning in mind, but only insofar as they fill a particular instructional or curricular need. That is, while video games and board games have the potential to be a great resource for educators, they should not be taken as the sole ideal means for delivering curricula in the schools or corporate and military training facilities of tomorrow. They are one tool in the toolkit, not likely a substitute for teachers and classrooms altogether. The playful learning inherent in many forms of games results from understanding game mechanics as a particular instructional delivery mechanism, good for establishing a learning ecology for particular kinds of content and types of thinking. The context in which games are played can completely influence the experience, so when high-stakes outcomes like grades are made contingent on play, content is less likely to be explored and certainly less likely to be seen as fun. Making games work in business, the sciences, museums, and massive online open courses like MOOCs relies on a full understanding of how people interact and learn in game environments generally, and how particular learners with particular experience sets are led to adopt and fulfill particular designed game objectives aligned with pre-specified student learning outcomes. This is quite different from what frequently occurs in practice, randomly overlaying game mechanics onto curricular content and waiting for efficient, engaging learning to emerge by virtue of being gamified, despite the fact that students are quite adept at identifying and ignoring school games as knockoffs of real games designed for entertainment. Lacking a digital crystal ball, we can't precisely predict the future of education or the exact instructional role games will come to play going forward, but there are several trends beginning to take hold that suggest possible paths toward innovation and transformation within the American education system in support of playful learning. Such trends include pedagogical shifts with just-in-time, personalized, student-centered learning and primarily online delivery services for freely available, rigorous content from university and business sources, increased academic enrollment of adults as a function of an aging population, retooling for changing job demands, and the need for workers to change careers frequently, redefine themselves, and become lifelong learners. The growth of innovative assessments, such as learner-adaptive testing, big data learner analytics, and artificial intelligence interfacing engines that can customize learning to the performance level of the student, and high-bandwidth mobile devices that enable learners to interact with clarity through technology, e.g. augmented reality, across the globe. Taken together, these developments provide a framework for how video games and associated mechanics could be wisely integrated to support novel, effective learning ecologies. Of course, this does not in and of itself answer the question, how might easy access to free game-infused instructional materials from universities and global businesses change the field of education? Circa 2017, academic researchers and other leaders remain undecided on exactly what a wise integration of games into instruction should look like. Various stakeholders seek to improve education for political, economic, or other ends, and it's unclear if any single solution, even a game-based one, can comprehensively address individual, academic, governmental, and industry instructional needs. Yet many state the issue of games and learning in terms of such a global outcome. Higher education has made the landscape of information online widely available as top-tier research institutions have begun openly sharing their instructional materials in the context of MOOCs and similar approaches, but their efforts are just one piece of the larger game-based learning puzzle. At least superficially, it would be straightforward to develop content beyond traditional one-way passive reading or viewing through the use of collaborative, social, and constructive experiences coupled with traditional fact-based instruction. For instance, ubiquitously accessible online and on-time 24/7 courses that combine accessibility to digital multimedia information, virtual experiences, and synchronous and asynchronous interactions for those willing to and able to participate in open courses. But after this simple adaptation of classic classroom learning, the vision for how games might be part of a truly different educational system is quite unclear. While we don't believe games hold the potential to address all of what is broken in Western education, see McGonigal 2011, one thing we do believe is that they will play an increasing role in the future of formal K-12 and higher education environments, as well as informal learning in zoos, museums, and the like. This means members of existing game design and education communities, for instance the collaborating authors of this book, will have to choose between being passive observers or active contributors to the complex and often political process of weaving together pedagogy, technology, and culture. We'll have to agree that games, or more specifically game mechanics and the engagement and joyful learning that they engender, are not only critical for shaping online and classroom instruction, but also in line with the evolution of schooling as a whole. We'll likewise need to endorse a hard push beyond questions like, are video games good or bad for education, or are games better for all students than traditional face-to-face lecture-style teaching, to questions about how game experiences vary with individual learner goals as an interaction with the parameters of an educational environment. Simply put, we'll need to form a cohesive, compelling argument in support of the notion that games create learning ecologies in and of themselves, and to understand them as ecologies, we need to view learning as situated. In turn, we need to apply cognitive science to understand game-based playful learning as it emerges in rich dynamic interactions with applied and formal settings, as well as how it interacts with location, curricular goals, and human and digital learning supports. This chapter is designed to anchor our collective thinking with respect to the value-added nature of games as learning ecologies and the dynamic complexities involved in player experience, narrative co-creation, and player-game interactions. As you might expect, we're not particularly interested in defining or detailing parameters of gamification, debates about game violence, evaluating individual game quality, or other topics that have become standard fare in extant games literature and the blogosphere. Instead, we seek to emphasize issues of instructional scalability, the induction of players to adopt curricular-related game goals, affordances of game-based instructional environments for supporting student-based learning, the relationship between play and transfer to applied contexts, and the value of games as part of an ecological psychology worldview. As longtime contributors in a field that has made a habit of playing it safe, pun intended, we seek to bring the dialogue in a more granular and meaningful direction. Let us play. Play is a form of wish fulfillment and serves a purpose in the evolution of society and culture that educators cannot ignore. That is why, before we share our vision for the future of games in education, we'd like to establish how, apart from video games specifically, other forms of games and play are and always have been essential to the way in which children learn. As an example, a pillar of educational psychology is Lev Vygotsky's social constructivist theory, which described play as crucial for a child's socio-cultural development. For Vygotsky, imaginative play provided a way for children to enact behaviors that they could not fulfill in real life. For example, a small child imagining herself as a horseback rider by picking up a stick and riding it long before being strong and big enough to be able to ride an actual horse. He furthered this point by explaining how role-playing activities enabled children to develop a vocabulary by giving voice to different characters and encouraging them to imitate others' more advanced language utterances. In so doing, they were able to learn by internalizing the world and reenacting events helpful for socializing them to the surrounding environment, e.g., a child playing family and saying to herself, "Now let's wash our hands and eat supper." According to Vygotsky, such inner speech emulated adult action and enabled the child to reflect on, experiment with, and understand activities in ways not possible when directly dealing with the exigencies of real life. Naturally, this perspective raised an important question about the relationship between playful learning and fun. Fun, an emotional reaction, has often been applied in a dualistic fashion where the individual assigning a given activity has determined how it should be perceived, i.e., work or play, rather than the individual experiencing it. Consider the pressure and stress of professional sports as a form of play, or the outcome of a traditional classroom teacher who, as a class assignment, requires all of their students to play 15 hours of Marvel Heroes 2017 lest they fail Creative Writing 101. In these cases, play very likely will not be experienced emotionally as fun whatsoever, even though the game rules, strategy, and the notion of winners and losers might still apply. Conversely, mundane tasks like mowing the lawn or folding laundry can become personal challenge sessions where participants time themselves on how quickly they can complete parts of each task and reward themselves for setting new personal bests. In the 1990s, Csikszentmihalyi described this work can be fun and play can be work concept using the term flow, a sense of cognitive engagement in which one loses track of time and narrows their focus to a single goal. When flow occurs, the individual experiences a sense of pleasure and accomplishment akin to fun, in spite of the goal fulfillment process appearing non-playful to an external observer. In the interest of scholarly dialogue, we suggest adopting working definitions for play and fun that clearly distinguish between the two as concepts. Play. A behavior that is not always fun but involves thinking, i.e. cognition, strategy, rules, and often imagination and creativity in the context of a game setting and mechanics, e.g. scores, timed responses, and competition. Fun. An emotional response that is orthogonal to play. Work tasks can be experienced as fun and play can be experienced as unfun, e.g. losing, playing a game for professional gain, or high-stakes competition. A note on games and simulations. In many ways, disambiguating games and simulations has proven to be even more challenging than operationally defining play and fun. The phrases educational game, role-playing, social simulation, and simulation game were first conflated with simulation during the 1970s, and scholars have had trouble meaningfully differentiating and categorizing them in the time since. Games are frequently cataloged as a subset of simulations, while simulations are equally often cataloged as a subset of games. Associated definitions are regularly rewritten to satisfy the conceptual needs of the individual studies in which they apply, inadvertently creating problems for replication, meta-analytics, cataloging, and more. Mark Prensky wrote in 2007 that the distinction between games and simulations is that, quote, simulations are about things or systems and how they behave, and games are about a fun user experience, end quote. Others have proposed that designers and researchers need to distinguish between games and simulations on a case-by-case basis rather than applying umbrella terminology, highlighting differences in story amount and quality, types of situations, decision-making required, rules involved, linear versus non-linear progression, feedback measures, and completion goals. Unfortunately, the former distinction is not true across all games and simulations, and the latter relies on distinctions for which there are often more exceptions than cases that fit the rules. To optimally characterize and describe the tools featured in this text, we recommend taking a middle path, adopting definitions for the words game and simulation that treat them as interconnected and occasionally overlapping tools rather than the same thing, direct subsets of one another, or synonyms for the increasingly common word gamification. Game. A tool with design goals, e.g. boss fights, winning, that requires interaction with an environment, virtual or real, and can include simulated elements of reality like gravity or momentum, but is not limited by parameters of the real world. Games are governed by rule sets, both design and emergent, take full advantage of imagination and creativity, often include scoring criteria and/or measurable win-loss outcomes, e.g. competitive among multiple players, collaborative with all players working to beat the game, or an individual competing against the game herself, and are explicitly directed toward playfulness. Simulation. A goal-driven tool that requires interaction with an environment, virtual or real, and often shares some mechanics with games, like missions, points, and timers, but is explicitly designed to veridically emulate some real-world interaction, process, situation, or phenomenon, like a flight simulator or medical simulator. While simulations are also governed by design and emergent rule sets, play is attenuated in order to represent the target interaction, process, situation, or phenomenon as accurately as possible. Naturally, the real-world aspects of simulations add much to their educational affordances, but they should be discussed separately, not as part of this book. Games as learning ecologies. In order to fully explain what is meant by games as learning ecologies, we must first describe what a learning ecology is and how it relates to gameplay in general. For this, we draw on the ecological psychology of James and Eleanor Gibson and on the cognitive psychology of situated learning and embodied cognition. The phrase learning ecology encompasses the full set of actual and possible interactions between an agent, its goals, and its environment as defined within the school of ecological psychology. It has roots in the epistemology of rationalism, i.e., emphasizing knowing through reason over intuition, introspection, or the inherent nature of man. Empiricism, i.e., emphasizing that learning about the world occurs through perception, not inborn understanding, and models of agent-environment interaction used in the hard sciences, e.g., biology or physics, that help to explain thinking and learning as adaptive processes rather than representational information processes like the internal workings of computers. Ecological psychologists presume that learners have a basic comportment to explore the world and learn by using their senses to guide action, preferring an integrated agent-environment view of learners as embodied and embedded in everyday cognition. As a subset of more general psychological research, ecological psychology grew out of Gibson's 1983 seminal description of how vision results from direct perception action rather than a reconstruction of meaning from lower-level cell function and the detection of energy properties requiring complex geometrical cerebral processing. This is often cited as the basis for situated cognition. Drawing on Eleanor Gibson's description of perceptual thinking and learning, the ecological approach to learning has as its basic tenet that learning is a refinement process represented by an improvement of attention and intention via experience with the world. This stands in contrast to information processing theory, which posits an accumulation of knowledge defined by representational memory storage and retrieval processes. Generally speaking, ecological psychologists believe that learning is a continual refinement of perception that is mostly unrelated to memory and enables individuals to see or perceive things that were always environmentally present but went undetected prior to experience with the world. Improved perception action can thus be summarized as the goal-driven education of attention, as mentioned earlier. This model is completed by an ontology of goals that also emerge from an agent's interaction with the world, drawing fundamentally on our general comportment to explore. Complex organisms like humans are defined as having a hierarchy of goals and intentions that unfold across various spacetimes and can be either simultaneously addressed or conflicting. At any given moment, a particular goal serves as the focus of an individual's interaction with the world and sets the boundary constraints on what can be done to progress toward goal fulfillment. Importantly, this also explains the individual motivations that underlie behavior. For example, as a player hacks and slashes through a game like Diablo 3, they may be in pursuit of more powerful armor and weapons in addition to helping other players level up their character avatars, providing strategic advice for boss fights, and contributing their knowledge to the game's external community, e.g. posting information in shared online spaces like the Diablo 3 forums or Reddit. Together, the player's individual goals lead to a particular behavior, that is, playing, and it becomes clear how they can pursue multiple goals at the same time. Yet, there are often competing goals embedded in an individual's goal hierarchy. Returning to our Diablo 3 player, there might also be a desire to make progress in a different video game, weed the garden, or finish an overdue writing assignment. The way competing goals are narrowed to the particular moment when an intention establishes the boundary constraints of action is called the ontological descent, an individual's movement toward an occasion that defines a particular situation or behavior. Of course, even when a situation is established and an interaction with the environment is underway, other goals can intervene and create a different situation that constrains behavior. For instance, as our player sits to complete a dungeon, the phone could ring or they might develop thirst, and a new goal, like acquiring a glass of water, would take over to define what is seen and what actions are taken in the world. Such events are referred to as dynamics of intention, that is, how individuals shift from one goal or set of goals to another. Fluctuations in intentionality lead to substantial variations in the way that we, as particular individuals, experience and behave in the world, meaning that our goals ultimately determine what we see, a concept described by James Gibson and others in terms of affordances. Affordances are the possibilities for action in the environment as defined by our perceptual detection systems, e.g. sight, smell, taste, hearing, and proprioception, and mediated by existing and emerging goals like those of the Diablo 3 player I described earlier. With respect to gaming specifically, they include all possibilities for interaction with the game world as designed, i.e. developer-intended rule sets, as well as any possibilities for interaction that arise from creative play and interaction with other players, i.e. emergent rule sets. At any particular time and in any particular place, there may be a nearly infinite number of affordances available, but only a small portion, rooted in the context of a player's in-the-moment intentions, will be detected on that occasion. Delving further into this idea requires familiarity with how affordances are co-defined by an agent's effectivities, or its ability to act on the environment. If, for instance, we were to position a small closet doorway beside a healthy human adult capable of walking through the frame, the doorway could be described as having the affordance passable. Yet if the same human adult were to use a wheelchair or had a large box to carry, the doorway would no longer have its same passable affordance. The same would be true if an elephant or a giraffe attempted to walk through a human-sized frame. Neither would fit, so the door would not have the passable affordance it held for the healthy human adult. This implies that the doorway's passable affordance does not exist abstractly as part of the world for all time and for all agents, but instead emerges in situ given a particular individual with a particular goal, occurring only when there is an immediate need and possibility for action. Put another way, the affordance emerges in the moment when an individual agent with particular effectivities acts toward the fulfillment of some goal, in this case, walking through a door frame. Understandably, this may seem to fall outside the scope of our broader thesis regarding games as learning ecologies and could be written off as 1. A matter of philosophy that bears minimal impact on the real world, much less the gaming world, 2. An exercise in semantics, and or 3. Nothing particularly new or exciting in the realm of learning science. But the notion of player-game context interaction carries important implications for the way we categorize play in general and study the consequences of gameplay specifically. There are many game designers and researchers who believe that they address player-game context interaction in their work, but their products do little to exemplify the terms and concepts described thus far and even undermine the mechanics that make games instructionally valuable to begin with. In fact, many have inadvertently done more to obscure the value-added benefits of games than take full advantage of them, e.g., engagement versus fun, productive failure versus trial and error, embodied cognition versus simple kinesthetic movement, learning versus test achievement. In a field seeking to grow and improve rather than shrink into inconsequentiality, this is not something to be taken lightly. On the whole, we have not adequately attended to the way individuals form dialectics with their respective in- and out-of-game environments. We have adhered to unsubstantiated assumptions about how and why individuals take particular game and metagame actions. Peer-reviewed literature, for instance, has seldom described metagame activities like trolling as part of an emergent rule set. For instance, World of Warcraft's affordance for players to merge individual intentions, effectivities, and existing game mechanics, like rideable mounts and a water walking spell, as means of interrupting other players' in-game fishing activities. Likewise, few, if any, pieces have evaluated learning among participants who willfully work in opposition to a desired learning outcome. For instance, SimCity users who sink their citizens into a nearby river rather than building a bustling metropolis. While neither of these situations may align with the achievement of desired learning outcomes, at least not those relevant in a classroom setting, they can and should not be dismissed as counterindicative of critical thinking and problem solving. To the contrary, they must be understood as evidence of higher-order thinking that has for too long gone overlooked. we would suggest that achievement tunnel vision is the primary reason games researchers have discovered game goodness and badness to be roughly equivocal in K-12 and higher education. After all, only students holding goals related to academic outcomes can be expected to improve on measures of traditional scholastic learning in the first place, and the same student playing on different days with different goals is likely to interact with a given game entirely differently from one session to the next. In the proverbial words of Heraclitus, you can never step in the same river twice, so it should come as little surprise that we have met with an uninterpretable zeroing effect where only some students improve their school performance through some games on some occasions as part of some studies. The challenges we face as a result of our collectively limited and predominantly non-ecological approach demonstrate how general questions about the net benefits of game-based instruction almost certainly mask individual situated cognitive consequences of classroom game use. In our opinion, learning scientists, teachers, and game designers would do well to focus on the game elements, mechanics, and affordances that further a range of educational and player goals, including but not limited to traditional academic achievement, e.g., trolling, creative play, participation in metagame experiences. Doing so would allow for the tracking and analysis of highly individualized ways in which play and learning emerge in game contexts, as well as reinforce our understanding of player-game environment dynamics as situated. That is, a rich interaction between player goals, game affordances, and the broader social context in which play occurs. We further propose that this is the only way that the field of game-based instruction will experience major shifts in design and research, by taking on the Mario-like task of exploding the game-based learning castle of the early and mid-aughts to build another castle grounded in ecological psychology and situated cognition. Changing course will not be simple or easy. In our 2012 Review of Educational Research meta-review, we recommended that researchers and designers more deeply consider the way individual differences in player skill, as well as their goals adopted in the moment, affect play and any resulting learning. Now, over 5 years later, we're asking for your help to spread this sentiment by reflecting upon and incorporating the warrants for a situated view into your own research, publications, and presentations. Without such a collaborative effort, it will become increasingly difficult to keep educational games work relevant and productive as we look ahead to the future. We offer the following pillars of research and design in hopes that they will serve as a rallying point for anyone seeking to join this cause. Player-game interaction. The experience of gameplay that leads to student learning outcomes is co-determined by the player's goals and intentions for play, and the affordances of a game serve as parameters for engagement as established by the game designers. Gameplay experiences are not always the experiences intended by the designers or those using the game instructionally, since players can use game elements in unexpected and/or unintended ways through modding, hacking, and trolling, some of which may have instructional value. Game ecosystem. Games researchers must consider all interactions that emerge from gameplay, not simply those that occur within the boundary constraints of the game as conceived by the game's original designer. These include metagame interactions like cheat, hint, player community forums, where games are discussed and strategies for play are analyzed outside of the game. Peripheral contexts may hold equal or more value than games themselves as they draw on player reflection, analysis, and collaboration. Where to begin? Before we flip the world of game-based learning on its head, we suggest considering how the games and game mechanics utilized in your everyday work best fit as tools to reform and improve the way we do education. As noted throughout this chapter, not all games can or will have the same affordances for instruction and learning, but they can all play some part in standing against the current dominant model for industrial-age schooling, i.e., efficiency and productivity analogous to assembly line manufacturing. As in the early 1900s, students are tracked by age and grade level so the same curriculum can be efficiently presented to large classes. Metrics related to Carnegie units and seat time are still implemented to enable productivity and quantify achievement. The spiral curriculum, developed so students would have a predictable schedule, continues routinizing our school days. The one-room schoolhouse and Dewey's 1932 belief in student-centered pedagogy have long been rejected in mainstream public education. Take a few moments to think about the following trends and whether they may impact your vision for the classroom of tomorrow. Trend 1. Widely available free online content. The The notion of free online content began with universities, many of them top-tier research institutions, providing instructional materials in the context of MOOCs. One of the emergent benefits of this trend has been learner control, allowing individuals of nearly any age to access content of their choice. As changes in job requirements and workforce makeup have necessitated a perennial update of employee skills and knowledge, the development of diverse, cross-age group learning communities has reshaped the way professional development and other learning opportunities can unfold. We believe that game narrative is one way to further expand this area, bringing disparate groups together as part of a shared environment. This is similar to watching a feature-length film that suddenly stops mid-story. While most of the audience has little in common upon entering the theater, at the moment the film is paused, they share a common experience history with the story and are equally prepared to anticipate what is coming next and provide advice to the characters. This may also lead to the emergence of common intentions, e.g., seeing how the story plays out, which, if used in conjunction with other mechanics, could be a powerful means of leveraging the adoption of particular learner goals. Trend 2. Mobile, just-in-time, personalized learning. Mobile technology has increasingly enabled students to learn at their own pace, anywhere and at any time. It has also made learning more student-centered and allowed individuals to carve their own paths through the curricular landscape. If content is universally available at little or no cost, for instance through bring-your-own-device programs, students are free to select desired content and only that content, a figurative buffet of learning. Of course, this comes with many pitfalls, including the likely loss of commitment to general education as learners direct their attention to only chosen interests or career skills and leave behind the exploration of new areas or the development of interdisciplinary concepts, e.g. intercultural competence. Yet, efforts to make learning personal through mobile tools might well be supplemented with advice and support, human or digital, that can ensure broader perspectives are aligned, while each unique path toward career preparation is navigated based on students' individual choices, i.e. adaptive, cross-discipline mobile games. Trend 3. Competency-based curricula and grading. Another trend that can potentially support just-in-time, personalized learning is competency-based grading. Many K-12 institutions have begun moving away from traditional 0 to 100 grading schemes to avoid averaging scores into vague letter grades like A through F. The adoption of state and national standards has enabled teachers to enumerate the actual skills that students should be able to demonstrate if they have mastered curricular content and, in so doing, have led to 1. More meaningful individual and project-based assessments, and 2. The creation of report cards that list contextually meaningful learning objectives. Electronic or paper portfolios of student work can document student skills in ways that are much more transferable from school to school and provide a much richer basis on which to make educational decisions like job promotion or college admission. We contend that standards-based assessment has much in common with many game mechanics, including the acquisition of gear that shows levels of achievement, badges for completing specified tasks, and even status on metagame websites where records of user contributions can be maintained and rated for usefulness by other players. This simple observation suggests to us there is potential for educational researchers to understand how game design has implemented such assessments and apply those mechanics to the mastery of more traditional curricula. Onward and upward. While the general trends highlighted throughout this chapter may substantially impact when and where students learn, games, or more specifically game mechanics and the engagement and joyful learning that they engender, have the potential to change the way we teach in the future, both online and in the classroom. Using games to influence instruction as a whole depends on how we understand both games and contemporary trends in education to support player and learner engagement. This leads us to ask a different question about games and learning than the simplistic "do games work in schools?" Specifically, discussing games as not simply an instructional tool but a holistic framework, which, as we will find, necessarily starts with deconstructing games used in ancient education. With that, we wish you a warm welcome to the world of games as learning ecologies. Happy reading and happy gaming. Note: it's dangerous to go alone. Take this. To more easily track and understand the author's shared reasoning, we recommend reviewing the following questions before beginning each new chapter. Can particular game narratives induce player goal adoption centered on designed learning outcomes and standard core curriculum content? How can and should games be designed to optimize community interaction, meaning-making, and measurable real-world impact rather than abstract fantasy entertainment? How can educational games be made scalable from the individual level up through the course, program, and system levels? What innovations in research methods are required to understand games and learning as situated? What games or game mechanics have deep value for researchers and designers but have largely gone overlooked? How can the game-based learning community better work to support a situated cognition, eco-psychological approach to research and design? Exploding the Castle. Rethinking how video games and game mechanics can shape the future of education. Published by Information Age Publishing. Edited by Dr. Michael F. Young and Dr. Stephen T. Slota of the University of Connecticut. Read by Dr. Stephen T. Slota.